If you have a few cuttings that you want to take, say 4, you would fit them in a plant pot. This is 50% bottom compost and 50% sharp sand. So I'll take some of the cuttings that we've taken and just push them into the compost. I'm turning the leaves onto the inside and we've got one more. Like that, and by doing it that way the leaves don't touch. Now, the way that I was originally taught, sort of Blue Peter stuff, this is to place it in a polythene bag. To create a mini greenhouse, and to make sure that the polythene bag stays on, you just fasten an elastic band. Now ideally this needs a couple of sticks inside to keep the polythene bag upright. The drawback with this method, I find, is that because the compost is, I've pre-wetted it, the inside of the polythene bag will fill up with condensation very quickly, and you need to remember every morning to remove the bag, turn it inside out and put it back on. The reason for this is, as I told you during the bit of botany, is that if the leaves get too damp, they will rot off, they will get a fungus like botrytis in them, they'll go brown and they'll disappear altogether. Now, you used to be able to get quite a few chemicals that would inhibit this process. I think Captan was one of them, but these chemicals were taken off the market a number of years ago. And it was at that point that I stopped taking cuttings, because I found it too difficult to keep the leaves alive long enough while the stem produced roots. That was my problem, probably because I was working full time, not looking at the cuttings often enough. The leaves were getting too damp, and it just was not successful. The trick of keeping the leaf alive long enough for the stem to grow roots is the key to success. Now, Harry Caddick, who ran Caddick's Clematis nursery near Warrington, Harry's been a friend of mine for many years, and he ran his successful Clematis nursery, and he showed me how he used to take his cuttings. He used to have a seed tray, and I guess this is the way all commercial organisations that grow clematis from cuttings do it. The seed tray with lots of holes in, so that you could see when the roots were forming, and he would fill that with the same sort of composition that I've used with the polythene bag. He would get probably at least 50 cuttings in there, and he would lightly cover it with a piece of polythene and some shading in the greenhouse, and he would leave the polythene on only for a couple of weeks. He reckoned that the cuttings didn't need it after that, but it was just lightly on so that it wasn't sealed like the polythene bag, but he would lift it on a daily basis to let them air. The other difference between his method and mine was the amount of water he would use and where he would use it. Let me show you on a smaller version. I'll put 2 cuttings in here. Now Harry would apply water probably daily. He would put them in dry and he would only wet very slightly the compost around the roots. He would keep the leaves totally dry, put that lightly on so that the leaves were not losing too much water, and some hessian or something to keep it shaded. Take it off on a daily basis, turn it over, and he would do that for a couple of weeks, making sure that he gave the stems water frequently but very sparingly. And commercially he must have been successful because it was his living, but he found that the best way of growing clematis from cuttings. So I'm going to try that. I'm not going to bore you by taking more cuttings and putting them in, but I'm going to fill that and see if I can replicate that method, and I'll show you how successful or otherwise I am in a later video. Now some people believe that you need bottom heat for cuttings. I don't know if that's true or not. I never used bottom heat. And I guess in a commercial nursery, unless it's a very big nursery, probably they don't because of the cost of it. But I've got a small propagator which I will put that in once I've filled it with more cuttings, and I'll water it on a daily basis like Harry suggested. I will also take some more nodal cuttings, just out of curiosity, and put them in a large pot and see if I can get some of those to root. So that's the traditional way of taking softwood cuttings. I use a different method, a more modern method, and for me a very successful method. I'll show you. I'll just deprive Willie of some of his shoots before I take you in to show you my hydropod. Sorry about this, Willie, but you've got a lot of them. He's in the process of trying to kill this rhododendron, but isn't he fabulous? This is the hydropod. I got it about 4 years ago. Somebody recommended it to me, and it is fantastic for taking cuttings of all sorts of garden plants. Penstemons root very easily. It was used by somebody to propagate hostas, a particular hosta that was very difficult, and I use this for all my clematis cuttings. It has space for 40 cuttings, and I'll show you what you do with them. The hydropod has a series of discs with slits in. These are just made out of foam, and the cutting slips inside. So these are some of the cuttings I took from Willie. Above the node, remove a leaf, and I'll scrape the bottom of that one, and you just push it inside the foam, and it means that the leaf stays dry and the base of the stem gets misted. I'll take the lid off and show you exactly what I mean. The cutting just fits in there. If I lift the lid, these are cuttings that I put in earlier in the week, so none of them will have roots. but you can see from the spray underneath that they are constantly bombarded, while above the leaves stay dry. Now there is a lid that goes on, but I keep the vents open all the time, and at this time of year I have a piece of hessian that goes round the back just to keep excess sun off. Now I certainly get, apart from the clematis that are particularly difficult to root, and some are, I get 85-90% success rate with cuttings. So I'd recommend this to anybody. If you Google hydropod, you'll get the suppliers. They're not that expensive, and they're worth their weight in gold. Even if you don't grow clematis, they're superb for other perennials. What you will need to do, however, if you use one of these, is to make yourself a chart, otherwise you won't remember which cutting is which. So I just put the name of the clematis at the top, the initials, and then I write in the initials, and I've made this the equivalent space of the hydropod. I've even written where the window is in case you get it upside down. And as cuttings root and you take them out, you could just cross them out and write in the next one that you're going to use in that space. So I'll write in that I've put a willy cutting in, and I'll put a couple more in as well. So if you want to produce more of your own young plants, propagate some of your old favourites, or as I said earlier, if you've got a clematis that is very bare at the bottom, is getting quite old, but is producing some new growth at the top, take some of that new growth and do some softwood cuttings. And then if the clematis becomes too old and you want to dig it up, you will have a vigorous young plant in a couple of years to put in its place. That is, unless it's one of those clematis which defies all efforts to propagate. Almondia is a bit like that, quite difficult. But the early ones and the large hybrids, they should root particularly easily, especially if you buy a hydropod. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope it's been useful. Let me know your views. Okay, bye.